My name is Jason, and this is Just Watches. Well, I finally obtained a Grail, and guess what? It didn't work. For some reason, I had this idea that if I got a Grand Seiko, it would cure my watch lust. And perhaps for a while it did, but sadly, the lust has returned. Let's take a look at this amazing watch that wasn't able to save me, and likely won't save you either. However, before we get to the review, if you're enjoying the contents of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you're enjoying the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much. So as of the recording, this watch is available from many different retailers. The MSRP is $3,200, however, in the used market, these go for around $2,300. The case is 39mm in diameter, 45mm lug to lug, but the solid end links do extend past the ends of the case, making the true lug to lug 50mm. The watch is 12mm thick, and the lug width opening is 19mm. Sized for my 6 3/4 inch wrist, it weighs in at 130 grams. Now the case is mostly brushed, save for two massive high polish shoulders running along the top of the mid case. This high polish is hand applied and referred to Grand Seiko as Zaratsu polishing. Now, while there are many incredibly impressive characteristics of this watch, Zaratsu polishing is one that didn't actually blow me away. It's gorgeous, but it has an almost mythical reputation that I don't think fully translated for me in person. That said, I think this case is the perfect size. The lugs and end links curve down sharply, and this in combination with the short lug to lug means this watch absolutely hugs the wrist. The crown guards angle out nicely and envelop the crown, and then those high polished shoulders serve as a nice backdrop framing the bezel and the dial. Finally, despite being quartz, it has a satisfying weight when worn on the bracelet. Seiko's weak point has always been bracelets, and this Grand Seiko is no exception. First of all, the lug width is 19mm, so it really limits your strap options if you want to change out the bracelet. The bracelet starts at 19mm and only tapers about 1mm to 18mm. The articulation against the back of the watch and between the links is pretty good. The finish is quite simple with brushing on the top and high polish on the sides. The nicest part of the bracelet is the clasp that is brushed and beautifully signed with GS and high polish against a satin background. The twin pushers reveal a fully milled clasp, but the clasp lacks any micro adjustments. Rather, half links are provided. Now, that is a very misleading term, as a full link is 10mm and a half link is 6.5mm. That difference means that by replacing a full link with the half link, you are reducing the size of the bracelet by 3.5mm and not the 5mm you might assume. By removing a full link and adding two half links, you're actually increasing the size of the bracelet by 3mm. Keeping this in mind, you can get a fairly good fit, but not having quick adjust is pretty painful on a luxury watch, especially considering how common it is on micro brands for about 1/6 of the price of this watch. Now, sizing is also quite difficult. They use two extraordinarily small screws that hold the pin in each link. Finally, the bracelet is quite plain overall. I think the links on my Marine Master Reduced from Seiko are more interesting, for example. All in all, the bracelet is functional, but definitely one of the weakest points of this watch overall. Now, the first absolute wow factor of this watch is the 9F A6 movement. This is a high accuracy quartz with a stated accuracy of plus or minus 10 seconds per year. However, having owned this watch for 7 months, I can report that it hasn't gained or lost a second in that time period. So I think you can expect to get much better quality than the stated accuracy. This is accomplished by Seiko growing their own quartz crystals, monitoring them, and then pairing them with an integrated circuit matched to each crystal's performance at different temperatures. Since temperature affects the vibration in the quartz crystal, the movement will check the temperature 540 times a day and make small adjustments to compensate. If that wasn't enough, the 9F uses a hairspring and a double-step motor to eliminate almost all backlash out of the second hand. It's subtle, but incredibly satisfying to watch the second hand advance with authority to each hash mark at the edge of the dial with almost no vibration. This watch is also a GMT and has a jumping hour hand, which makes this a quote-unquote true GMT watch. The last interesting feature is the instant date change. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't happen at exactly midnight. I think they guarantee it happens within the first 4 minutes, but on this particular watch, at about 3 minutes, the changeover occurs and it's lightning fast. And then finally, the battery life is 3 years, and the second hand will advance only once every 2 seconds when the battery is low. The 5mm screw-down crown is nicely knurled and signed with GS in high polish against a satin background. It's actually a touch small and a bit tricky to access between the crown guards. This is a bit unfortunate on a GMT because theoretically you're traveling often and then changing that local hour hand. The threading action is very smooth, and then that jumping hour hand is easy to use. It will make the hands jiggle slightly, but in the manual they actually indicate to expect this. There is no quick set date on this GMT, but you can change the date in either direction with that jumping hour hand. This is very nice since changing the date and changing your local time doesn't require hacking the movement, which would sort of defeat the purpose of having such an accurate movement in this watch. The flat sapphire crystal is a touch proud of the bezel and has a facet around the edge. The AR is quite good, but I'm actually frustrated Seiko doesn't use their super clear coating on their Grand Seikos as far as I know. That super clear coating is the best AR coating I've ever seen, and I would love if they would use it on more watches, especially at this price point. The stainless steel bezel has a nice high polish bevel along the bottom and is framed on the inner side by the facet on the edge of the crystal. The 24-hour GMT track is deeply set into the bezel and in color black, making it extremely legible. There is a chapter ring around the edge of the dial that is half black and half silver to represent the day and night sections of the GMT. The minute dashes are actually on the dial proper, however with only marks for the hours on the chapter ring. What I often don't hear mentioned is just how deep black this dial is. It reminds me of the Urushi lacquer dial on my Sargs 029. The Grand Seiko GS is applied at 12 with Grand Seiko printed below. GMT in orange resides at 6 to match the GMT hand, and a beautifully framed date window resides at 3. The applied indices are mind-boggling. They use the two elements that I think makes a great applied index perfect, those being complex geometry and mixed surface finishing. The indices have an angled facet around every edge that is the perfect angle to frame the index in light, in something I can only really describe as the Grand Seiko glow. It is difficult to capture on camera, but incredible in person. The indices also have a set of incredibly small ridges on the top surface that give the index an iridescent effect similar to that of a prism or diamond. Finally, a small lume channel is cut into each index. The sword-style minute and hour hands have the same incredible finishing as the indices, including faceted edges that are at that perfect angle to frame the hands in light. The top of the hands are brushed and also filled with lume. The minute hand reaches perfectly to the chapter ring. The second hand is a simple high-polished stick with a counterbalance, but is mesmerizing due to its decisive movements around the dial. Finally, the GMT hand is orange, which helps set it apart and is also plenty long, terminating at the chapter ring. The hands, indices, and dial are really the showstoppers of this watch, and they come together perfectly to create a very flashy, but also extremely legible package. Now, this is Seiko lume, so it's responsive and bright, but we have a lot less surface area than usual, as you can see. And then here is the watch on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. I think the size for me is absolutely perfect, and it wears like a dream. So pros and cons, starting with the pros. While undoubtedly a luxury watch at a luxury price, this is a nice entry point into Grand Seiko. You get all of the extremely high-level finishing paired with an unbelievable accurate movement, but at about half to 1/3 of the price of what one of their mechanical models would cost. This watch also features a GMT function that lets you jump the hour hand rather than the GMT hand, which allows you to preserve that excellent accuracy. I think the black dial is actually underappreciated on this one. It's incredibly deep and inky and is the perfect backdrop for the hands and indices. Finally, I think this watch is the perfect size, and the nicely curved Seiko case fits excellent on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. As for cons, the most obvious is the bracelet. I think some of the newer Grand Seiko models have introduced quick adjust clasps, which would be very welcome on this particular watch. Also at 19mm, it really limits your strap options. Finally, the last con is the size of the crown. I prefer larger crowns, and this crown is both small and then a little bit bit hard to get access to because it's tucked under fairly large crown guards. Rather than talk about comparables, I'm going to use this time to talk about the psychology of getting this watch. Now, a luxury watch may or may not be a goal of yours, but I have wanted a Grand Seiko for over 5 years now. Now, I feel lucky to have finally obtained one, and it is by far the nicest watch in my collection, but I can honestly say I don't really enjoy it more than any of the other watches that have been longtime keepers in my collection. While I had hoped getting a Grail might satisfy me in a deeper and more permanent way, I was disappointed to discover it did not. It did, however, reaffirm that I can derive just as much joy out of a watch that costs $50 as one that costs $3,000, and that was a refreshing discovery. So there you have it, the Grand Seiko SBGN003. What do you think about this watch? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you're enjoying the contents of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you like the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. That's all for this time. My name is Jason, and you have been watching Just Watches.